Welcome to Tyler.M TV. Make sure you get comfortable because in today's video, we're going to be taking a look into the strangest last meals criminals have ever asked for on death row. Now, for those of you who may not know what death row is, also known as condemned row, let me explain. In some states and countries around the world, they still have the death sentence in place, which means the judge allows the jury the option of a death penalty where the convicted criminal will be executed or an option of life in prison. Death row is the place in prison that houses inmates awaiting their execution date. Now, many places no longer have the death sentence in place, but many places still do. As of 2020, there is a total of 53 countries that still have the death penalty in effect, which can be death by hanging, shooting, lethal injection, beheading, or electrocution. There is also 25 states in the United States that still implement the death sentence to this day. Now, one thing that you may not know is that in many places, a day or two before the execution of the inmate is granted a last meal. Now, there's places where they just give you the usual prison food, but in many places, you're granted pretty much whatever you desire, of course, with some restrictions. Now that you have a bit more of an understanding, let's get into some of the strangest requests from criminals on death row. The first person we're going to be talking about is an American man named Robert Alton Harris, born January 15th, 1953. Robert was known as a car thief, getting into trouble as early as just 10 years old. By the age of 13, Robert was placed into a juvenile detention center for stealing a car, and during his time there, he was sexually assaulted. At the age of 14, Robert's mother abandoned him. Robert then made his way to Oklahoma from Sacramento to live with his brother and sister. Soon after, he was arrested in Florida and placed into a juvenile detention center where he would spend his next 3 years, once again for stealing a car. He was released in 1970 and was able to find work. He even got married and had a son. By the time of 1975, Robert was once again imprisoned, but this time for manslaughter, in which he was granted parole in January 1978. By July 5th, 1978, Harris would get arrested again, but this time accompanied by his young brother. Robert Harris and his brother forced two 16-year-old boys, one John Mayeski and two Michael Baker, to drive to a remote area where the two younger boys would soon after be killed. The brothers then made their way to San Diego, where they would rob a bank and use the car as a getaway. Not more than an hour later, the brothers were arrested by Officer Steve Baker. Robert was charged with murder, auto theft, kidnapping, burglary, and bank robbery. Later that day, after the arrest, Officer Steve Baker received the news that his son, Michael Baker, had been killed. On March 6, 1979, Robert Harris was sentenced to death by gas chamber. On April 21, 1992, Robert Harris was executed. Before his execution, Robert was granted his last meal, which consisted of a 24-piece bucket of Kentucky Fried Chicken, 2 large pizzas, ice cream, a bag of jelly beans, a 6-pack of Pepsi, and a pack of Camel cigarettes. Robert first wanted the pizzas he would receive from Domino's, but then changed his mind and wanted Tombstone Pizza. Now I want you to let me know down below in the comments what you think about the irony of this story. The second person we're going to be getting into is a man named James Edward Smith, born in 1936, which would later be convicted of murder and executed. But one day on Friday, May 4th, 1962, James Smith murdered a woman named Sarah Isabella Cross, who owned a sweet shop in Manchester. James walked into the sweet shop and tragically began striking Sarah with multiple glass soda bottles in order to rob her of 6 euros before he made his way out the back door. The body of the victim was later discovered behind the counter of the sweet shop. After officials investigated the scene, they were able to find fingerprints on a door frame which had just recently been painted. Due to James's fingerprints already being in the system from prior incidents, he was quickly arrested for the crime. The investigators then sent off the fragments of the broken glass bottles from the crime scene to be reassembled. Officials also recovered clothing from James's house, which they would later use a special vacuum to retrieve the microscopic pieces of glass stuck in the clothing. They would later fit those pieces to the reassembled bottle, in which they fit perfect. On October 15, 1962, James was on trial. The trial took 3 days, and it only took the jury 20 minutes to come to a unanimous guilty verdict, with the sentence of death by hanging. It was on Wednesday, the 18th of November, 1962, that James Edward Smith would be executed and buried in an unmarked grave in the prison cemetery the same day. Many years later, the body of James Smith, along with other prisoners buried in the prison, were exhumed and then cremated. Before James's execution, he was granted his last meal, which was a chocolate cake and a tall glass of orange juice. Would you choose a glass of orange juice to wash down a chocolate cake? This last person we're going to be talking about is a man born on January 16th, 1961 in Salt Lake City, Utah, named Ronnie Lee Gardner. And his request is one you will not expect. Ronnie's parents divorced when he was at the very young age of 18 months. 6 months later, Ronnie was found wandering the street alone in a diaper. When officials found Ronnie, they noticed he was malnourished, which caused child welfare to file a petition of failure to care and take Ronnie into custody, although they later returned Ronnie to his mother. Ronnie didn't have a good relationship with his father, based on the belief that Ronnie was not his, and the father often expressed that opinion to Ronnie. Ronnie stated that he was later raised by his older sister and would often be sexually abused by his siblings, causing Ronnie to run away and seek comfort in a hobo camp. By the young age of 10, Ronnie was strongly addicted to drugs and alcohol. Along the way, Ronnie and his brother got into trouble and were arrested for stealing a pair of cowboy boots. Ronnie stated that their father came to bail them out, but only bailed out Ronnie's brother and left him to suffer in prison. After getting out of prison one night on October 9th, 1984, while under the influence of cocaine, Ronnie Gardner decided to rob the Cheers Tavern in Salt Lake City. During the robbery, he shot a bartender named Melvin John Arderstrom in the face, killing him for less than $100. The craziest part about this is Ronnie attended the funeral, claiming he was an old childhood friend. 3 weeks after the funeral, officials were able to track down Ronnie due to a tip police received, finding him at his cousin's house. Ronnie told police the shooting only happened because Arderstrom put up a fight. The interesting thing is, police did not find any evidence to support Ronnie's claim. Ronnie was placed in jail with a hefty bail set to $1.5 million. The night of the robbery, Ronnie had a getaway driver who later testified against him. On April 2nd, 1985, the trial for Arderstrom's murder was taking place when Ronnie attempted to escape with a revolver he smuggled in. During the escape attempt, Ronnie was shot in the chest by a guard, Luther Hensley. Wounded, Ronnie Gardner then shot an unarmed bailiff in the abdomen. Ronnie, well injured, was able to make his way to the courtroom archives where he confronted attorneys Robert McCree and Michael Burdell, shooting one of them in the eye. Ronnie then made his way outside, where he was quickly surrounded by dozens of officers. Ronnie then tossed the gun to the side and yelled to officers not to shoot him, saying that he didn't have a gun. Ronnie was then taken to a hospital where he recovered from his injuries along with the bailiff. Michael Burdell wasn't so lucky. In June of 1985, Ronnie pleaded guilty to the murder of Otterstrom and received a sentence of life in prison without parole. On October 22, 1985, the judge instructed the jury that they had an option of a lesser offense, which would be manslaughter, if the jury found Ronnie to be under mental or emotional distress during the incident where he shot attorney Burdell. After 3 hours, the jury decided Ronnie was guilty of capital murder and was sentenced to death. Now, Ronnie had two choices on how it would be done. One being lethal injection, the other being fire squad. Ronnie decided to be executed by the fire squad. Before Ronnie Lee Gardner was executed, he was granted a last meal. The meal Ronnie ordered consisted of lobster, steak, and pie, while watching the Lord of the Rings trilogy, which has a duration of 3 hours and 48 minutes. I guess that's one way to prolong your time. Now I want to know down below in the comments what you guys think about these stories and what you guys think about these last meals. Let me know down below in the comments, and also if you guys were in this situation, what would be your last meal choice? But I'm going to go ahead and close out today's video here. I hope you guys really enjoyed it. If you did, give it a nice big thumbs up. I really do appreciate it. I want to thank you guys so much for all the love and support that you guys continuously give me. It means the world to me, and I will see you guys in my next video. Peace.